About 10 or 11 years ago, I was sat in a cafe with today's guest, and he had just quit his job in medical sales or pharmaceutical sales or something. And I was still working as a waitress, and I had started my last company, Hungry for Happiness. And I remember this specific moment of him sharing his dream of creating this brand that helps people in relationships. And I was sharing my dreams of helping people who struggle with emotional eating. And it has been such an epic journey doing life with Mark Groves over the last decade and just watching him manifest and create. No pun intended, because his brand is called Create the Love. But he's just created the most incredible brand, helping people all over the world really thrive in relationships. If you don't know Mark, first of all, where have you been? He's the guy who takes all of your messy, complicated, why do I keep dating people like this relationship struggles and hits you hard in the gut, in the jugular where you didn't know you needed. He definitely did that for me a couple years ago when I was in a relationship with a man who is amazing, but wasn't meeting me emotionally. And Mark just like took a took a steak knife to my jugular and woke me up. And yeah, he's like the best friend who will lovingly roast your life choices, but also will hand you the roadmap to your healing. And let's be honest, guys, we all need a friend like that. So I feel so grateful that I've been able to sit down with him today. He is the founder of Create the Love, as I shared. He's the host of the wildly popular Mark Groves podcast. He's an absolute genius when it comes to decoding human connection, attachment, why we sabotage ourselves and really sabotage the love that we crave. In this conversation, we get real AF about healing, about relationships, about the wild, messy journey of self-discovery. And obviously, because it's Mark and I, there's a ton of laughs because that's just what happens when we get together. Before you dive in, you guys, if you are here because you feel like you are called to help others break from their emotional blocks, heal their trauma, and really create deep, true transformation, you've got to check out the Somatic Coaching Certification. Okay, so the Somatic Coaching Certification is where science meets soul. It's a powerful training that we only launch once a year. We are launching it. It's only happening once. You got to get in while you can. It's a powerful training that teaches you how to work with the body, regulate the nervous system, and really help guide people through deep healing transformation. If you've ever felt like traditional coaching just scratches the surface, which I definitely did when I was a mindset coach, and you're ready to create real shifts in not only your life, but in the life of your clients, then definitely check out this program. It is absolutely extraordinary. People ask all the time, what's the difference between the Breathwork program and the Somatic coaching program? Well, the Breathwork program is very specific to teaching breathwork and that modality and that architecture. This is going deeper into the body. We do a lot of IFS work, really working with parts, really making sure that we know how to metabolize parts and bring us back into our wholeness. We work with neuroscience. We work with nervous system regulation. It is a powerful transformational program, and it will unearth and heal a lot in you so that you can do that in other people. So head on over to pausebreathwork.com/somatic. That's pausebreathwork.com/somatic and apply. And if it feels like a fit for us both, we would love to have you join us in April. All right, let's get into it. Mark Groves, ladies and gentlemen.
Can't be contained.
That's what I'm talking about. Mark Groves, welcome to the podcast.
So happy to be here.
I have this very vivid memory of you and I sitting in a coffee shop. I remember what you were wearing when we were talking about building our businesses. And I think you had like just quit your job, but it's just so crazy to see the evolution over the last, 13 years?
Wild to think of what starts as a couple dreams becomes dreams. That's, that's how it's supposed to work. So, when someone
100%.
says, leap and the net will appear, That's such a romantic notion, but when you don't see the net, because I don't think you get to see the net till you leap. Like it's not a,
100%.
it's like that faith part of going into action for something that is a soul's call.
And it doesn't stop. Like, I don't think the net appears once and you're like, "Oh, here's the net," because it's like the path that we've chosen is constant evolution. And you just never know when your soul is like, "Go do this thing." And you just have, it's like a blank slate. You're like, "I don't know." And yeah, the work is just continually trusting and looking back for evidence to go, "Well, I was held then, and I was held then, and I was held then. So let's just
Right.
keep moving." Yeah. Whether it's work or relationships or whatever it is.
Yeah, whenever I'm on the precipice of like a new thing, I look back and think, oh, but the evidence was there, like as you're saying. But it's still harder because it's maybe like the cliff is bigger this time. It's
Mm.
like I know how it works, but yet I still don't fully trust when the thing that you're leaping towards doesn't make sense. And I was listening to Carolyn Mace's book.
Oh, she's so good.
She's so good. She was like would hate how I describe her, I would imagine, but I call her like if Eckhart Tolle and Judge Judy had a kid, it would be her.
I just call her like one of the original gangsters. I don't know. She'd probably hate that too.
She's so savage as a truth teller, and I love it. And she said in her book, The Power of Holy Language, because her audibles are workshops, and she said, you can tell when you're getting guidance from God because it's annoying.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, oh, that's so true. Like I remember when I got the call to like quit drinking or to quit my job or to quit sugar. I was like, "Ah,
Mm.
sugar? Like,
Yeah.
you know, one I recently got was to quit natural flavors, anything with natural
Oh,
flavors.
interesting.
Yeah. Then I
When did you
looked them
stop
up and I'm
drinking?
like, that makes sense. I should quit those. Uh, I stopped drinking 5 years, 6 years ago.
Why?
I had the call. It was
Yeah.
like I kept getting this message that I needed to just try life without it. And there was like a culmination of obvious messages from the universe. But one was I was listening to this book by Paul Selig, The Channel, and
Yeah.
it's called
So
The Book
good.
of Truth. And it said, your body can only alchemize the lowest of level of truth you're willing to hold. And I was like, what does that mean? And it said, when you know something is true, but you don't live it, it's like being a fish who lives in an aquarium and learns about the ocean and then goes back to the aquarium and pretends they don't know. And it was like, what truths do you know that you don't live? And it was like, I need alcohol to connect. And then I quit. That was actually it.
So good. Such a distraction. And talk about something
Yeah.
that pulls on our life force more than anything else. And is so acceptable?
It's just like part of it. And I think, self abandonment is actually what creates the doorway for anything that anesthetizes you because you need to be anesthetized from the pain of you leaving yourself. And
Mm.
so, it's like Gabor Mate says, the wrong questions, why the addiction? The right questions, why the pain? So I always think of like, what is the pain that lives below the thing you're trying to alter your state from? But if you stop anesthetizing, then now you have, the doorway, as Rumi would say.
Social media too, dude. Like the
Oh,
addiction to social media is so real. Eric and I were walking down somewhere the other day, and we were just observing all of the humans just in their phones, like not paying attention to anything or anyone. Farmers market, that's where we were. And I'm like, yo, look at where we are. This is so beautiful. Look at all these things. Like, get off your fucking phones. It's crazy.
it
Like,
really is.
what is the pain? What is the suffering that is existing within us that requires us to be so, yeah, like use those tools that just leave us feeling empty.
Well, I think you have this both end. You have the like part that these devices are specifically designed to do just that, so they hijack your dopamine pathways. Uh, Constantly using phones interacts with blue light. And so the blue light actually disrupts your melatonin production, which is the precursor for so many hormones. So you have the very real biological process But what I noticed, like, let's say once I quit drinking, then it was like, oh, what else do I use to anesthetize me?
Mm.
What else do I need to get sober from? And when social media came up for to bat, because I was basically like playing whack-a-mole with all the things.
Yeah.
When social media came up, I was like, but my business is dependent on social media. My
Sure.
life is, it's so integrated, and which of course is so smart of social media is like, oh, I'll let you build this thing. And then once you've built it, I'm going to change how it works. So
Yeah.
now you have to like keep figuring out how it works because these many iterations is what's going to keep you addicted and needing me. And I started to think about if you can't leave social media, then you saying yes to it is not actually consent. It is obviously consensual if you're saying yes to it, but I mean, on a deeper level, whenever you don't have access to know about anything, your yes is really bullshit. And so I started to see that that was happening in my life. And when I left, it was amazing the level of vitality that returned to my body. And all of a sudden, I wasn't consumed by content creation, etc. I didn't actually expect to come back. But, after a lot of I realized I was playing out a wound with Instagram,
Hmm.
as we do. And so I think the doorway is just the unprocessed stuff that we don't look at. I think at the core of it is we all have innate values and we often don't live them. And so when your choices are not congruent with that, you're going to need something to regulate, to soothe. And social media, what a great way to outsource regulation,
Mm.
just doom scroll.
What was the wound that got you to leave, and what was the healing that brought you back? And how does it feel now?
It was like I got the message to leave about 3 years ago. And what made me leave was just this like deep knowing I had to. It was like I couldn't
Right.
ignore it anymore.
Right.
It was causing me to feel burnt out, overwhelmed, anxious. And I just knew I had to listen. It was like I was on the edge of a cliff. None of it made sense. I didn't want to have to leave. Everyone else seemed to be fine. But then I realized everyone else is not fine because once you leave, one of my friends said to me when I left, she said, it's like we're in Shawshank and you got early release, you know? And I thought,
What an analogy.
right, it's so good. And I thought, isn't that so fascinating? I gave this talk at a entrepreneurs conference, and I said, how many people here use social media for the business? Of course, everyone. And I said, how many have a tension with it, a friction, a stress? Everybody. And I thought, isn't this so fascinating that we've just like normalized that this is the
Yeah.
way you do things? So when I was interviewing a friend of mine, Mike Elliott, who's a relationship coach for my podcast, he said to me, have you ever thought, because he said, what was the feeling that you most wanted when you were on social media? And what made social media even more complex for me was that I was witnessing what was going on relationally and psychologically during COVID. And I was like, I can't not speak out about this sort of weaponization of belonging and using shame as a mechanism of behavioral modification. And he said, what would you have most wanted? And I said, to be validated.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, he's like so sweet. He's like, that makes sense. I mean, if your perspective isn't validated, you're unsafe. And he's like, so I get that. And he goes, have you ever thought that you're playing out your wound with your mom with Instagram? And I was like, those when someone tells you something and you're like, fuck you, and
And
tell
wow.
me more.
Tell me more. Yeah.
And he's like, well, I just think of you as a little kid who like, you're the youngest of three. And, if you're validated, if you exist, then you're safe, blah, blah, blah. We went into a bit more detail. And then I got home and I said to Kai, you will not believe what this fucking guy said to me. And she looks at me and she goes, well, yeah. And I'm like, what do you mean? Well, yeah. Why didn't you fucking say anything? And she said, uh, well, so my mother and I had a lot of tension during COVID because she wanted me to get vaccinated and I wasn't going to get vaccinated. And my wife said to me, have you ever thought that your mother's need for you to get vaccinated was because she needed you to be aligned with what she chose,
Mm,
because I was enmeshed as a kid,
right.
so, but she needed me to see the world the same way so that the way she saw it was validated.
Yes.
And I was like,
Yes.
oh my God.
Wow.
And so I started to see that that same longing that I had as a kid was the longing I sought in social media. And then just through reflections on that and processing it, all of a sudden social media didn't feel heavy anymore. All of a sudden I was like, oh, I can like come and go from this relationship. And when someone would write something nasty, I was like, delete, block, like, don't give
Mhm.
a fuck.
Mhm.
And so,
And
yeah,
before that wasn't the case, before it would kinda dig into that wound?
well, I think like anybody, it would be personalized. I would feel it. You don't know this person. They've got a cat profile picture. Often they don't even have a
It's
profile
always the
picture.
cat profiles pictures
It's
with,
always the
like,
cat
the
people.
funky tuna 994.
Totally,
I'm like,
totally.
"Dude, who dis
Yeah,
bitch?"
who is this person? And yeah, so what brought me back was the recognition that it was a safe place to be, that I didn't need to depend on it. I didn't need it
Yeah.
anymore. I moved my business off of it.
Yeah.
But now it was this opportunity. I would have things to say, and then I'd post it on, like, let's say Substack, and I get like 5 people are like, great. So, you
You're
know,
like, "Where's the 23,000 people that normally comment on this?"
yeah. And I was realizing that it was like a friend and also Gary Vee, I'd be listening to him, and I remember he said, you might believe that social media is destroying kids, destroying whatever. And he's like, and that might be true. And he's like, but the conversation is happening there. So if
Yeah.
you want to have a conversation, that's where it's happening. And I realized I had to do, and now I see it everywhere, a lot of nervous system work just to be able to be in relationship to it. And now I just feel much better, lighter.
What's gonna be really interesting is to teach people how to regulate their nervous system in such a highly quick-paced, speedy world. I think that's
Hmm.
the most rebellious thing that we can do is actually pay attention to nervous system regulation in our world. So, I'm curious for you, for people listening who are like, "I know that I'm jacked up. I know my nervous system is wrecked." What are some things that they can do? What do you recommend?
Well, the first thing, like, as you teach, having the process of breath work connects you back to your body. Like, you can't be scrolling Instagram and do breath work.
Mm.
And that, I mean, you could, but it'd be fucked up. You know, not not
We
to
should start
say
a
that if
trend.
you are feeling, if you're gonna, the really important thing is that if you're gonna use social media, you use it in specific places in your home or wherever you do it. The reason is because unconsciously, the mind associates, like if you're in your living room checking it, in your bathroom checking it, in your office checking it,
Yeah. Yeah.
unconsciously, and let's say you have 1,000 followers, when you go into those places, you're unconsciously always associating those places with 1,000 people.
Oh, dude, this is so good. Okay, the other day, Eric, like, came into the house and he's like, "All right, every room has a purpose." And like, it's exactly what you're just saying.
Hmm.
He's like, "The office is only for work. We're not working in the living room. We're not working in the kitchen." I love this. Keep going.
Yeah, well, and then what happens is if you set structured times, now granted, people might be launching and doing
Yeah.
things, and I get it,
Yeah.
you might have more frequency. Um, but being able to have structured times, like I check it from this time to this time, I think scheduling's really important. That's been harder for me to just catch up on right now, just because I
Yeah.
just came back and I'm like, okay, how am I going to do all this?
Yeah.
Uh, so scheduling your posts, that's huge for regulation,
Mhm.
because I
Mhm.
find I'm someone who always created last minute. Like, I'm big into
Same.
the, like, it's due tomorrow, I should probably start today.
Yeah.
And that is because I actually activate based on fight. And so creativity, when we're last minute people, we're actually using fight or some form of activation to create. And it's actually learning to not use activation to create, to actually create from very regulated spaces. And so that aspect also, I think, for a lot of people, is just recognizing and naming the tension that exists with social media, being able to have a practice of breath that exists when you're scrolling it, just so that you're still teaching your body, because your body doesn't know the difference between a troll and an actually life-threatening event. Like,
Yes.
Social
Yes.
stress will cause
Yes.
your glucose to spike because of cortisol and all the things, because your body says, we need to go, we need to do something. So it dumps sugar in your body.
Mm.
And that would be the same response that you get from an email from a lawyer versus seeing a bear in the woods.
Yeah.
And so we have to realize that we're actually playing with very delicate, ancient biology, and we are not designed to have 1,000 people have access to us 24 hours a day. And I think this is
Mm.
the main thing that I really learned is that if you and I are having a conversation around a fire in a village and social media doesn't exist, and let's say we're talking about something potentially inflammatory in the village, politics, whatever it is, the moment you and I go to bed, there's no social risk anymore. But social media, even if you have a personal account, doesn't matter. But if your business is on there, that's even bigger.
Yeah.
What's happening is your unconscious is always saying, am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? So you're actually using part of your surveillance to constantly unconsciously wonder if you're socially safe 24 hours a day. We're not meant to do that. And so that I think we just need to acknowledge that that exists, and we need to do the deeper work of separating like true social safety from that. And of course, cancel culture is
Yeah.
real.
Yeah.
So, you could say one wrong thing. You could get a wrong letter in the LGBTQ. You could get you could say something that's considered right wing or left wing or
Yeah.
woke or whatever.
Yeah.
And you all of a sudden have a cascade of an army of severely trauma bonded people coming for you. And
It's
that's real.
wild. It's wild. During 2020, I had never felt anything like that before.
Me neither.
I'm like, "Oh, this is a dark side of humanity that I have never experienced." And like the visceral reaction in my body was so intense. And it's interesting. I was doing a breathwork session the other day and I said to Eric, I'm like, I think I just got over what happened in 2020.
Yeah, that's the same way I felt.
Like I think like I'm finally just able to create without giving a fuck.
Yeah.
Prior to 2020, like the first, 5 years of being a creator, I didn't give a shit about like I just like created and expressed and it was just like whatever. And then I got smacked. We both did. Unfairly, for speaking our truth, which is just so in what other circumstance do you speak your truth from your heart and you get that? Like, you know what I mean? Like you if I take what I said on social and I said it to my group of friends, we would have a laugh. It's just
Oh,
so
yeah.
interesting
Yeah.
that you can't anticipate.
Well, you have this really amplified level of fear, which as soon as you're in that state, your cognition doesn't work. So your critical thinking's gone. Your prefrontal cortex has left the building, it's shut down.
See you.
And I think we saw a lot of that because, you say, oh, well, it doesn't stop transmission. It's not even in the primary clinical trials. I don't know how they can say that. And you'd get attacked. And then it clearly didn't. And then what was just so fascinating was to see this sort of continue moving of the messaging, right? And then now I have a friend the other day, so where I grew up in Calgary, I was in a very different position opinion wise than everyone I grew up with, basically, maybe a few. But I was the only one really speaking anything and saying anything. And I was obviously doing it very publicly. And one of my friends the other day, I saw him, we just moved back to Calgary. And he said to me, man, you must kind of feel a bit vindicated, hey? Like, because he was in a different view, but he was not oppositional about it. There was a large group of them saying Mark's now an anti-vaxxer, blah, blah, blah. And I said, yeah, like the ego part of me is like, yeah, motherfuckers, like, guess what? Guess who was right, bitches? But then the like real human part of me is like, how sad? How sad that we couldn't have a conversation. How sad that people went to name calling because they were so afraid. How sad that media and government amplified so much fear, such a disservice to the people they're meant to serve, that they created so much fear and so much messaging that leveraged shame and belonging, that they destroyed relationships, they destroyed families, they destroyed couples, they destroyed cultures and communities. And we're left to pick up the pieces. At least in the US, and this is my opinion, it might not be true for someone else. And the beautiful thing is, we can love each other and disagree, or you can not, but I'll still love whoever I disagree with. Uh, but what's, at least in the US, there seems to be some level of accountability, being leveraged. And of course,
There is
people's
now.
votes,
Yeah.
right? And Maha. And
Yeah.
I find it so strange that uh, wanting more definitive science on things like vaccines is somehow partisan.
Yeah. It's
Or,
wild.
and I look at Canada and there's really no action being taken, and so, I think from a healing perspective, it's really important to own the fractures that have happened, but I'm not going to allow closure to lay on that or forgiveness to lay on someone else's behavior. But I look back and I'm like, man, I'm so sorry for all the people who got bamboozled. And also, when there's an industrial strength propaganda campaign, of course, I had someone the other day write me and say, how do I process the shame that I got the vaccine because I needed it for work or whatever it was? And I thought, man, that's so real.
So real.
It
So
doesn't
real.
help to call someone like, oh, you're a sheep. No, this is exactly like your job is on the line or you get the thing. That's a complete violation of informed consent. But we don't want to talk about that either. Yeah. So I think we all have experienced trauma, deep,
100%. And it sort of was like, we're moving on now. It's done. And I'm like, there is so much work to be done as far as like,
so much.
again, like unearthing that shame and healing it and processing it through the body and coming back into connection and coming back into self discernment,
Right.
of like, really, can we learn now that our body, we have to be in self consent with ourselves? We have to be. And that contributes to nervous system regulation. Like when we are in consent with our bodies, when we're in consent with ourselves, when we are listening to the intelligence that lives in our body, that gives us that exhale of regulation. But where have we been taught that? It's especially during that time, it's like the outsourcing of our power it was either that or you feel shame. It's like
Right.
it was a lose lose.
Yeah, because if you stand in your sovereignty, if that's the appropriate choice you really wanted to do, because it could be the appropriate choice to get the vaccine. But if your deeper choice was to say no, you're risking belonging. So, I mean, that's why belonging is such a powerful behavior modifier. And they know that. They're called nudge techniques. They're used by public health. I mean, you look at the history of propaganda, it's all about leveraging belonging.
Eric and I studied that. We're
Yeah.
like in the thick of COVID. He's like, this is the playbook for how you do this,
Right.
And we went back and we looked at other times in history where they use these exact same tactics. This is not new. There is a playbook for this.
Yeah, there is. Yeah, it's to say you as Brene Brown says, dehumanization always begins with language, because the moment we use language, we push them outside our circle, and then now we're not like them, and if we're not like them and who they are potentially harms us. I mean, look at the history of Nazi Germany. Now we're willing to harm them. I feel like it's coming back, at least, some level. And of course, like any pendulum, is it going to swing too far? Who knows? It swung really fucking far the other way. So, the malicious ego part of me is like, people need to fucking pay. you know? And I do think people need to be held accountable. I don't think you can just do everything they did, like pharmaceutical companies and
Yeah.
public health promoting a product and saying it's safe and effective, when you literally you can't. I mean, I was in pharma, so it's like you're not allowed to say something. Like, you can't say it's safe and effective when you don't have long-term data. Like, but all the rules went out. And I think what's so destabilizing for our system, and I think about this from a parts perspective, is you might have this part who really is afraid, right? And is grasping for a solution. And then you have another part who doesn't want to participate or take the thing that is proposed the solution. And you have another part that does, so really seeing which one drove the car and what was the mechanism that made one part take over? Because there's now you see the doorway to how you can be manipulated and influenced. And when all those parts are all working at the same time, you end up in freeze because they're in opposition to one another. And that's what I felt I really just finally came out of, was like, I've been in functional freeze. It's presented as confusion or uncertainty or whatever it is. Yeah.
Right. And what's the antidote when we find ourselves in that place of that functional freeze?
Well, recognizing that there's probably like naming each part. Okay, I have a part of me that just wants to survive and get things done. And I have another part of me that doesn't want to upset my mom or my friends or whatever. And I have another part of me who's like, you better say fucking no, let's burn this bitch down. And if that part gets silenced, which is anger, rage, value, there's a value to that too. And we silence that part, we're now going to have a lot of shame, but we're actually limiting our access to our voice because we silenced it. So that's why we'll feel freeze, because we're not able to mobilize forward, because we actually need the action of that part. And so the way to begin to move out of that is, one, to just name, because you might have more parts, right? To name them all, but then also to, as an adult, like, that's because all these parts are younger, and it doesn't mean they all don't serve a purpose. They do, or they wouldn't exist. Because the people pleasing part likely exists from our childhood. And so we still have made it in charge of driving our life. So then we'd look like, where else does this part work? Because if I fawn about one thing, I'm probably going to start fawning about a bunch of things till I name that part that's loud and doesn't give a fuck. His name is Zero Fucks Mark. Yeah. And the part that's the people pleaser is named Too Many Fucks, because he just gives too many fucks. And he's been driving my life a lot. And so when Zero Fucks, when I was like, what do you want to say? What do you need to do? And he was like, about motherfucking time. And the when I was processing all of that, each part, by the way, has its own nervous system tone. So one's more of a fawn. The other one is like highly activated. Highly activated. Zero Fucks was like, I need a seat at the table all the time.
Yeah.
And this little suck up little bitch, he doesn't get to make all the choices. Like, I am the decider first, because if you listen to me, we wouldn't be in a lot of circumstances. We wouldn't we wouldn't care about what people say. Make me the part that checks Instagram. Don't let too many fucks check Instagram. He's going to get
Yeah.
burned. So you start to activate and see, as an adult who's directing everything, says, it's kind of like the movie Inside Out, right?
Oh
Which
my
I think,
God.
right.
Best movie ever.
Yeah. So that's like, for people to understand, that's exactly what's
So
going
good.
on. And if they're all trying to steer,
Mm-hmm.
what really needs to happen is the one that's trying to maintain safety the most is usually the one driving. But what really needs to happen is the adult version of you steps in and says, okay, you all have a seat at the table, but you're definitely not driving. You're definitely
Mm-hmm.
not driving. And so because this will show up in everything. It's not, obviously not just in something like a public health choice.
Yeah. I found for myself to be super valuable is like really dieting with these parts,
Mm-hmm.
And as if I'm having a conversation with like you, of like, what's up? What do you really need right now? How can I love you more? How can I attune to you more? What's underneath that? What's underneath
Yeah.
that fight, or what's underneath that people pleasing, or what's underneath that collapse? What is that? That core. And what I found to be true is these parts speak back and they actually tell us exactly what they need all the time,
Right.
And it's never what the unconscious action is. It's
No.
always there's a purity there.
There's
Always
a
a
beauty
purity.
to it. There's
Mm.
a beauty to it. I heard a quote recently from Bill Plotkin, who's a really beautiful writer. He's writes about soul and psychology. I think he's a psychologist. Anyways, he said that um, your core wound, which I think of these like what activates these parts is generally core wound, that your core wound is not healable and it is not meant to be healed. But if you are willing to walk into it, it just might facilitate a soul encounter. And I see the service of like navigating all these parts, the too many fucks mark, which is, he like needed to exist for me to exist today.
Yeah.
And maybe it's not about healing him, but actually about listening to him and giving him the thing that he wanted, which was attunement, attention, and not have to like fawn and people please to maintain perceived safety. And when we can reach into who we've been with such a deep level of compassion, now we can move forward. And the other day, someone in my community said, I feel like I'm burnt out with personal growth. Like it doesn't end. I've been doing it for 10 years. I'm doing therapy. I'm here. Right. And I said, well, what made you start? She said, well, I just felt broken. And I said, what was broken about you? She said, oh man, I never thought of that. She's like, I guess I just felt like who I was being didn't work. And I said, at the core of what generally turns people towards personal growth is a belief in brokenness, right? I have something that needs to be fixed.
Yeah.
And I said, so if you think about that, when you're consuming content and you're like a cup, when you're pouring something in that you're learning, that means there's a space that needs that.
Mm.
I'm broken. This thing's going to give me the solution and fix me. And then my cup will be full. I said, but the identity is I'm broken. So it will never be full.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, so that leads to the consumption, which I think is actually the way it needs to start anyway. So it actually serves a beautiful purpose. But eventually, you actually have to become healed, right? Like that, which I know goes in contrast to the words I said from Bill Plotkin. But what really happens is that you go from, I'm learning these things not to fix me. And what you do is you start teaching. And when you start teaching, what happens, which is really fascinating to think about this, is you become a conduit.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're consuming the information, it's not filling brokenness, it's moving through you.
Yes.
And you're the only way it can move in a specific way. So like when I read something about internal family systems, I consume it differently than someone else. And then I'm able to alchemize that. But because it's not resolving some sense of self-perception of brokenness, it's actually leading to some sort of integration. And then now I can teach it. And she actually desired to be a teacher, to like be a guide and a shaman. And she's not doing it.
Yeah.
I said, of course, your consumption of information is about repair, not expansion. And, of course, after that, she was like,
dude.
oh, yeah, the conduit, man, that's what changes everything.
I find that's a lot of healing that happens with our breathwork facilitators. And that
Oh,
was
I
my
bet.
experience with breathwork facilitation is when I first started teaching it, something took over me that was like healing me simultaneously as I was sharing the work. And it's magic. Even when like we're on stage, do you feel that when we're on stage?
Oh my God.
It's
Yeah.
so fun to be on
It's
stage
my
with you, by the
favorite.
way. I love
Same.
it.
Yeah, that was fun.
It's just like something else is happening. The thoughts are not coming from my mind. They're coming from otherworldly. And it's almost as if I'm being taught as I'm teaching. There's this
Right.
beautiful relationship going on there.
Yeah, because we get out of the way.
Yeah.
But I get in the way too, sometimes. And that's where the freezing feels, that's because there's the very real, like 3D human, we got bills and mortgages and human relationships where, not everyone's thinking about things this way. And that's not a evidence of their dysfunction or a lack of alignment. It just is. I learned a long time ago that not everybody wants to be happy. Like
That was a sobering thought for me.
same.
You
I used
know,
to
when
think
I'm
I'm
like,
going to teach
oh,
everybody everything and everyone's
yeah,
going to awaken and
yeah,
realize, nah,
yeah. I had this realization probably like 6 years ago where I'm like, oh, some souls come here to not wake up. Some souls come here to be miserable. Some souls come
right.
here to be addicted to their suffering. And that is okay, Sam. You don't have to make everyone happy.
But if they tried some breath work,
Yeah. But if you went to www.pausebreathwork.com.
Right. I mean, what you said about the facilitators, I think is so beautiful because it's like, as it was your journey, you experienced the medicine and then you realize that it's medicine, and
Mm.
then you become the medicine,
Mm.
and you get to be the vehicle that someone else meets that, and then you get to be the vehicle of vehicles. You're like now the manufacturing plant that
Yep.
builds the vehicles, and then they'll all do the same thing. And it's interesting that these technologies that have existed for millennia um, are so powerfully healing. Like you look at the documentary Healed by Kelly Goris. She talks about like she looks at like radical remissions and what puts people in radical remission. And she has like 9 things that people do. And out of the 9, like 7 are emotionally related. If you can get your nervous system, which at the core of nervous system regulation is breath because of vagal nerve tone, it's like if you can get your nervous system to get in a regulated state, maybe for the first time in your life,
Mm-hmm.
your body is no longer in a dysregulated state. That means it can heal because healing is not a priority when you're running from a tiger,
100%.
right? Just like
100%.
digestion isn't. That's why
Yeah.
digestive issues